All right, Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen.
Amen. So that voice is that man you see there in the picture, Father Robert Holet. We're going to join him in just a second in his house in Virginia. But first, let's start with our breathing. All right, our breathing, our prayer. Okay, so we're going to breathe in slowly. Say the first half of the Jesus prayer. Breathe out slowly, and I'll say the second half. Okay, ready? Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Last time. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Okay. All right, so let's pull up Father Robert. There he is. There he is. In his home in Virginia, I assume.
Yes, indeed.
Pretty quiet there.
Thanks be to God. Christine was out watching the indigo bunting and the woodpeckers at the bird feeder. So doing those kinds of things these days, and just enjoying it. In fact, it's interesting that there's just in the Paschal Triodian this week, the Thomas week. There's these wonderful images of springtime, the flowering of the spring. It's spring. It's light. It's and it's so different from the whole Lenten, Triodium, which has all of the just so penitential. But this has this certain life, especially during Thomas week. So I really always enjoy this, and it matches our experience, at least here in Virginia,
Right.
and I'm sure down there in Georgia as well. It's good to see you. And
Yeah, the azaleas, are almost past their prime. So they're like about 3 or 4 days past that full bloom Augusta Masters,
yeah,
perfection. But yeah, it's still
right.
it's still really good. And it's not too hot yet, right? So we're still nights in the 50s and days in the 70s. So it's perfect weather for pretty much everything. So
Well, I've been following our friends up to the north of here, and I always, having lived in Pittsburgh, that's sort of a reference point for me weather-wise. And especially if you go Pittsburgh and north, it's been cold. And Cleveland had snow, I think, on Pascha, and really, I mean, this is not like a really early Pascha.
right.
This is already almost May,
Yeah.
and they're still getting it. So did I know St. Tikhon's. There was a picture at St. Tikhon's of like 3 or 4 inches of snow up there
Yeah.
on Lazarus Saturday and stuff. So it's just been one of those strange years. But it's kind of nice because when it tends to be chilly, then spring comes slowly, but it tends to stay longer. I don't know if the cooler weather has been hanging out down in Georgia, but that's kind of been the theme here, and it's been kind of nice watching things come in more slowly, despite the fact that winter was very warm. So,
Yeah. And of course, we're noticing it more too, because we're
right.
just out and around our homes. We're not seeing it from through the windows of our cars and things like this. So we're watching
Right.
it, like paint drying. This is what we do. Yeah. So we moved here last summer. So I'm not used to the patterns again yet, right?
Yeah.
I haven't lived here since 1993. So it's been a while, right? And since then, I've mostly lived up north and then some time in Virginia. But we got here, and growing up, I remember 1 or 2 times that it snowed, and that's it. Just growing up in Georgia, 1 or 2 times, right? And 1, 2 was pretty spectacular. Right, our bus was trying to go down the hill. There's a bridge over a creek, and it was one of those deals where the cars are lined up at the top, and then you watch them one by one go down, and most of them slide off to the side, right?
Oh, jeez.
And so it was our turn, and we're like, yeah, here we go, right? Of course, we end up sliding into a ditch. I mean, what else are you gonna do, right? And so we all just unloaded, and we knew the way home, so it was a great adventure. Oh, and then so not a lot of snow. We'd get ice storms, right? You'd get those maybe once a year, where you get ice storms that drop the telephone lines and power lines and stuff. But this year we got a few inches of snow. It only snowed once, but it was something that anybody almost anywhere in the world would say, yeah, that's snow, right? And it reminded me of when I first moved to Allentown, right? Because Allentown, when I first moved there, I was like, yeah, you know what, I better get some snow tires. So I went in and they said, you don't need snow tires. This is Lehigh Valley. We don't get that kind of snow. I don't know where you're used to being. I'm like, okay, fine. And then one day on a Saturday, we got 3 foot of snow. One day, just boom. It was the first time that I didn't celebrate liturgy on Sunday because nobody could move.
Right.
We couldn't get anywhere. And I was like, thank you for the welcome present, right? It was awesome.
You didn't know what you were in for then, huh?
Right, yeah.
Well, no, you've been in Boston,
Yeah.
So I mean, you had seen more Easters up there and all that.
Oh, yeah. And the year
So,
before,
in Island.
I think it was the year before there in Woonsock is kind of a suburb of Boston, right? It's maybe
Right.
45 minutes away, an hour away. And we had that winter where, it was piled up 6 feet in the yards. It was just, it was insane. Oh, that was awesome. That was truly awesome. Yeah, but things kept going. I remember I did get a ticket though. It was just things that I don't think about because
Like the snow.
no, we managed to keep the things cleared. But I was driving, and so imagine you're driving and it's not like what we're used to because it's like a wall going to the corner of every street, right? So you come up to a 4-way, and what do? You can't see anything, right? So you kind of edge out, and
Right.
yep, sure enough, I edged out right into somebody's door, and
Oh my goodness.
I was like, oh, really, you're going to give me a ticket for this? I mean, I can see insurance claim and stuff, but a ticket? Really? Thank you very much. Oh yeah, weather. What are you going to do? So has the pollen moved through there in Virginia yet?
Pretty much, and I don't think it was a really bad year this year. Maybe it's because it's coming in more slowly. It's like when it's, I think, warmer, all the trees open at the same time. It's like all the pollen is out, and it's like it's snowing out here. I mean, you remember how the yellow film on cars and everything on anything left outside just covers everything. But this year has been relatively benign, and I think the rain too has just been. There's been a lot of rain here, so it's been just cleaning out the air.
Yeah.
So I think now that lends itself then to other mold mildew problems,
Right.
especially later on in summer. But
Yeah.
for now we're doing thankfully.
Yeah, right. Oh man, so I noticed you responded to an article someone posted on Facebook, and it was a Washington Post article about kind of the situation that many churches are in, right? So early on, when this stuff hit, there were articles about how we had transitioned to meet the needs of the people by using virtual services and things, and there was an article in the New York Post or something about how all we needed to do was increase attendance at masses, close the churches, right? Because there were hundreds of thousands of people tuning in to mass at one of the big churches there. But now, along with looking at what's happening to our economy, like right now the big news is the chicken farms and stuff, at least around here. That's the largest part of the economy where I live. we're looking at, oh my goodness, a lot of these restaurants aren't going to make it through this. They have such thin margins, right? And some will adapt, right? But yeah, it's not going to look the same. And many of the churches are in that same category as restaurants, where the margins are so small, right?
Right.
That you wonder what's going to happen. So, what do you think? We're familiar with a lot of our parishes, and we're not, claiming to know the future. But what does this look like? What does this struggle look like to a parish board? And what are the sorts of responses that are useful in this situation?
Well, I think in terms of, I think there's a great breadth of really what parishes are experiencing and going to experience. I can only imagine, having studied kind of like a little bit. I've asked hierarchs for information about parish financials, and unfortunately, we're not always that. People are reluctant to share financial anything, whether it's personal finances, church finances, parish finances, or whatever. That's unfortunate because I don't think we have a good understanding of where we've been during the heyday. Okay, and so as to have made preparations so that if the stormy weather came, we were at least somewhat prepared for that. And so I think a lot of parishes are just unprepared. They have very little in terms of their contingency funds. No reserves, no deep reserves. There are a few parishes that I know of that do have, unfortunately, they have money stashed away. Unfortunately, they have them placed in funds called endowments, which by law, you're only allowed to take money out of an endowment, a little bit at a time. The principal has to remain in place. The idea is that you earn money off of the endowment. And the endowments are I've always said that endowments are a bad idea in a church anyway. Now they're a really bad idea because if you follow the law regarding this, that the interest rates have been low, and now with the prime interest rate, the Fed lowering rates, they're just such a fraction, and you have this pool of money that could have been or could be used to pay bills or to, make major repairs or that kind of thing, and support this contingency effort. And oh, by the way, do charity or do, ministerial kinds of things, but it's just not available. And those are the quote lucky parishes, the ones that have the pools of funds. But the ones that don't, it's going to be hand to mouth, and now you're relying upon a highly weakened economy. People just don't have the cash flow for themselves. But I just go back to the fact that we are exactly where God wants us to be. So that's the good news, and I've thought about this frequently in the past, actually, long before this coronavirus came up. We are the spiritual heirs of Constantinople. Okay. What happened to the Church of Constantinople? Look at it now. The great church. Well, God permitted, all of the churches. Look at the churches of the book of Revelation. For whatever reasons, God in His wisdom, this is His church. That's the bottom line. It's His church. It's given to us to steward in our own way, or in His way, in our own time. And what the long run looks like in terms of our churches, it's completely up to Him. We only have today.
Yeah, let me throw an idea at you, Father Robert. It's not a well-formed idea, but in my study of political economy, right, there's this idea of sunk costs, right? And the basic logic behind sunk costs is they should not affect your present decision making, right? You should base your present decision making based on the opportunities available at the time and the opportunity structure that you have, not based on what you've invested and whether that investment has worked or not, right?
Right.
So I've been thinking that in my mind I've been comparing the ability of churches like the one that I'm leading right now, which meets in a storefront with very low overhead, and we could go to someone's living room tomorrow without a loss. We might have to divide into two living rooms or something, but we'd be able to pivot quickly to match those kinds of needs, right?
Right.
And I've been comparing that with the other churches that I've led, where you have this large infrastructure, and you're like, man, you can't pivot as quickly. You've got this huge amount of bills that you got to make. Is it the case that that's the wrong way to look at it? Is it the case where you say, no, where am I right now? And if my and we can't see, this is where economics fails, right? Economics fails here is because I was about to say where you look at your physical infrastructure as just a liability. But it's harder for us than that, right? Because our churches are sanctified. They're not just buildings, they're places that have become holy, not just with memories, right? But we believe that things become blessed. How am I to understand and the people who are leading large churches like this, how are they to look at the present situation in relationship to the opportunities? What should we be willing to let go of so that we can meet the needs of the gospel? Any idea on that? It's a tough question.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's tough, and it's hard to narrow it down because, again, the situation, as you mentioned, of a small parish that has very little, in terms of tangible assets and the management, if you're talking about the management of those, as opposed to a church that has a large, plant that, needs to be sustained financially. And maybe the big question is, does it need to be sustained? What do we do with it? And how attached are we to it? It really raises great questions, actually. It's the same questions that faced the churches in 1454 or, during the communist revolution. Was, okay, the buildings are gone, or our control of what we knew of how we worshiped, how we gathered as communities, how we taught, how we do what churches do, that's gone. Okay, but we're still here. God's church is still here. The people are still there. And so if it's truly that radical of a change, then the church must change. And going back to that more flexible model is maybe where a lot of us, should be. I noted this. There are always in the Charlottesville area startup churches and different models that the Protestant churches are using. I've known a couple of pastors who, and there's almost, I would say, a kind of a movement to do that, where they just don't invest in property, period. They focus all their energy on the development of communities and people relationships. They rent a space from often a school or somewhere, for Sunday morning worship, because they're not attached to that space. Okay, so in terms of detachment, it's really kind of a good thing, or potentially a good thing. But to make the transition for us as, Orthodox people who, for us, locus is important. The place where we celebrate the mystical supper, the place where we gather as a community, a fellowship. Place has always been important to us, and yet, there are many examples, as I mentioned, where the idea of place has changed. So it could well be that if this were to, continue for any length of time, there may be churches one by one having to make decisions to just simply, no longer continue to meet in their established buildings, or keep the church in the small hall underneath and sell off the building next door, the one that was used to make the the kitchen to make all the food for the, all of the big socials and things like that, or some sort of difficult decisions that would radically change or challenge the mindset of people in terms of leadership and the vision of what the church is. And that could actually be a good thing in the long run, certainly more responsive. The other alternative is, gee, we can't do what we always did, therefore we just have to quit. We have to shut down. And that's not an option.
Right. Yeah, and we're going to have mixed reactions to this, right? So we're going to try out a lot of different things as communities, and I think that's awesome, right? This decentralization, right? But looking just at the worst case scenario, I like the way you framed it from the beginning. Hey, look, no matter where it happens, God is with us. This is where we are. This is where we're called to serve, and this is His will for us right now. And that is and it's not something just to be, endured. It's something that we're called to sanctify, right? So whatever that response is, it needs to be done in that kind of frame. The joy, the love, the possibility. Another word for possibility is hope, right? The knowledge that God is going to be realized, His will is going to be realized as long as we dedicate ourselves in Him and with Him to the purpose, right? And we painted things kind of black to begin with, right? I mean, the worst thing that might happen is that we get a huge spike as we try to save the way that we bring things that people need to them, right? This thing we call an economy, right? The thing that serves the needs of the people. We're recognizing, hey, it's about to, this thing's a complex thing and we don't understand the side effects and we better get going. So we'll probably see a combination of, death from the virus and an economic depression, right? So that's kind of what I'm seeing, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong on both those things, right? We are a resilient people, but that's kind of what I'm. If we know that we can meet the needs of the worst thing that could happen, anything else is gravy, right? So if the economy recovers this summer, we're back out. We find a whatever, a vaccine or something. Hey, fantastic. We're more appreciative for what we have, right? Glory to God.
Absolutely. Right. And next Pascha will be, everybody will remember. Oh yeah, we didn't have Pascha last year, or weren't able to gather. So I think I know for myself, that was one of the things that was just very clear, is how we take all of this for granted.
Yeah.
Sunday in, Sunday out, we just assume, it's all going to be there. And I say this, in terms of, and people, and certainly in our UOC-USA, many of our brothers and sisters have lost their churches over the years.
Right.
And so what have those communities experienced in terms of that sense of loss? But the church resurrects. It finds new expressions, new places to gather, new ways of doing things. As you were saying that, though, it occurred to me that I think what we really need is a certain level of prayer for depth or discernment, and the quiet time may give us that if we'll take advantage of it. But because the solutions that we need, we do not know what they are. Okay, so guess what? The only way to find them is to go to the Lord. I go back to that picture of the loaves and the fishes. And you look around, you just don't have. It just isn't there. We know what it's like to feed 5,000. We could do that on a good day, but this is not a good day. We just don't have the resources, and we only got a couple fish, and So I just go back to that image as one that says the only place to find the solution is where the Orthodox Church is uniquely gifted and called to find and provide the solutions, not only for ourselves but for the world, which is our relationship with God. He is the solution. He is, and so we're just in an interesting place and challenges. What it really is our a real calling as the church in this age. Um, and it may be something very different. There may be solutions. There may be uh, insights. There may be spiritual understandings about what life is and how we're to go about life. Maybe that's what the Lord really wants to show us, somehow arising from this. That is far more important than even the economic law. You
Yeah, and so let's milk this parable a little bit more, right? The loaves and the fishes, right? If another way, so if the disciples had not been humble enough to take the second command of the Lord seriously, right? Because they didn't take the first one, right? Um, so because we can be hard headed, right? And so, like you said, we know how to feed people, right? So we come up with a plan. We're going to send a team to requisition from the city, and in the meantime, we're going to set up the tables for preparation. So as soon as they get back with the food that they managed to scrounge, we're going to do like the way we've always done it, right? Well, that wouldn't have worked, right? The people would have gone hungry. It wouldn't have worked. And so our ability to pivot to match the needs of the situation requires that kind of humility, that kind of the quiet that really is only developed through that kind of quiet prayer. And other ways too help develop, submission to the will of God
Yep.
as is expressed through the church. That's all. That I got to tell you, that's been the hardest thing for me. That's probably been the greatest. The Lord knows I need humility because I'm proud, and I have an anti-authoritarian streak in me. It's genetic, right? And so, Lord says you need orthodoxy, right? What? Oh, okay. And it's so. There are other ways I'm saying that the Lord develops this kind of humility, this build quiet in us. And as you said, this is a great time for us to prepare. And it's not just preparing plans, contingencies, and so on. It's that quiet, listen to the Lord, right?
It takes really, I think it's a combination of all these things. In terms of first a prayer and a discernment and an inspiration that comes from somewhere other than just my own creativity or whatever. But it's truly a synergy of God's will, His passion, His word, and then it's gonna have to, in most cases, manifest itself in some work, in some action, in some activity. And this is one of the challenges I think we actually sort of face in the church today, where it's almost like I fear we're falling into a passivity. We're in this sort of wait and see mode, and we know there are a whole bunch of people working like crazy on the front lines, taking care of sick people and all that sort of thing. But I just wonder if there isn't work that we should be doing in terms of you know the spiritual work, first of all, which the church never stops doing. We're always supposed to be doing that, but particularly now. But then also to make considerations. So, for example, a parish board, you mentioned that earlier. They've got to really be seriously looking at the real down-to-earth picture as to where they are, and then praying about that and asking and looking for solutions and looking for different ways of doing things that they may be counterintuitive. They may be something that has never been done before in our parish. And, who knows what that might be. So it could be manifestations of maybe.
Right, and it's in a way it's an exciting time, right? And it's also a time for us to, when in normal times, paradigmatic times, right?
Right.
Then their SOPs work, right? And you can select for certain types of leaders and certain types of characters for for different roles. This
Right.
this isn't normal time.
Right.
This is a time where you want to hear that diversity of voices. Somebody who just showed up at the parish a year ago is going to see things and possibilities that we're going to miss, right?
Right.
So
That is
whereas
so true.
whereas
That
they
is
might be the first one you poo-poo because they don't get it in normal times, right? Talk to us in 3 years
right.
when you understand how we do things, right? No, you got to have that person on there. You got to have the
Right.
curmudgeon. The person says, no, that's not going to work. I know that this is an unpopular opinion, but it's got to be said. That won't work,
Yep.
right? Because in normal times, go along to get along, that's SOP, right? It may
Right.
not be the best SOP, but it's,
Right.
it works in a way. This is not that time. So, I don't be afraid to hear people say things. I say that's not just to you, but to all of us. We shouldn't be afraid to hear things that make us uncomfortable, right? Just because it makes it uncomfortable and I can come up with words against it, doesn't mean that it's not valuable.
Sure.
Yeah. One of
Yeah.
the yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that in terms of, for all we know, there may be tremendous opportunities available to us that are just around the corner, though we haven't even thought about, but that will manifest themselves if we're open to it.
Yeah.
And it might be that person who's only been here for a year who was somewhere else and they saw something else or experienced something else that could be our answer uh, for our situation. But I was thinking in terms of like evangelization, and people are going to be asking very fundamental questions in their lives and in their hearts, because when all the stuff that we have sunk our time, effort, energy, money, thought, love, care into for the last 15, 20, 25, 50 years, if we start losing those things, and if there is real loss, then this places tremendous spiritual strain on us. And that spiritual strain, um, people that have gone through a lot of difficulties in life can handle, but those that haven't, this may be a first time for them. And certainly, um, I go back to something from your experience, and those who have been in the military. Historically, traditionally, faith has been so important in the military because it was the proverbial, foxhole, and you don't know whether you're going to ever get out of that foxhole or not. So there was, toughest of times was one of the things that really sent people into spiritual awareness. And so it could be that just these tough times are going to give us opportunities to share the gospel, or to live more deeply the gospel, or take it for real now. That maybe before it was something that was kind of more superficial or whatever. All of this, may be possible for us. And really, then as the church, if it's a possibility for us and for others, then as the church, then it's our responsibility to help the possibility be realized for people. In other words, as grace is calling them, the church has all of these resources. The church has resources for us to learn how to pray in solitude, alone. We have spiritual prayers. We have a way of Christian life that thrives in dense communities of high activity, or out in the desert as a solitary monk. And so it's maybe these are some of the things that we need to be able to bring to the community, to the culture, that just simply are not known elsewhere. And so that's again where we have. That's kind of like looking for the two fish that we have. It at first doesn't look like much, but it really is the thing that will feed people
Yes.
in the right hand.
Yeah.
When we realize its power, to really help them. Anyway.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And in normal times, right? We kind of shifted in terms of the provision of that, the the mechanism of evangelization was centered around the priest, right? This and that, that's has its pluses and minuses in normal time, but now there, the demand, the need is going to be. It's always been great, and we've ignored it at our own sin. But with these coming challenges, the existential angst, the temptation for despondency, it's going to be huge, right? And we've got to get out there and say, no, the light of Christ. Christ will save you. Christ will sustain you. We've got to be able to do that, and it can't be. Well, I shouldn't say it can't be. What are the qualifications needed to go out and tell somebody about Christ? To tell somebody about the value of a prayer rule? What does that look like? How do we empower the saints to do the work of the church?
Yeah, that's exactly the question. And unfortunately, some of the traditional modes that we've had in terms of the really important, I think, person-to-person dimensions are limited because of the restrictions that we have on just simply gathering and meeting and coming into close proximity and literally laying hands on one another and all those kinds of things have been imposed upon us, and restrictions have been imposed. But within, first of all, building on what we already have, I think is one of the keys. In other words, what have we done? What have we learned? Can we? This isn't like reinventing the wheel. The churches and communities have done this. If we just took a look at all of the different people who have come into our parish communities and converted, if we just studied them, how did this person come? How did they hear about it? 9 times out of 10, it was because it was the neighbor or somebody invited them to church. In this case, it might be saying, hey, I'm going to be, why don't you listen to our Archbishop Daniel's celebration of, the second Sunday of Pascha next week, or, something like that. That is a Sunday activity. It could be just finding ways to help people make that first connection to that thing which is orthodoxy, which is beyond just the superficial idea of, well, I think I know what orthodoxy is, which is a big problem. We have a big problem. I've seen this develop in the last 25 years. The whole term orthodoxy has been taken by the culture, and it's been taken actually by the Protestant churches. If you go on to one of the big evangelical groups has something which they call Orthodox Joy or something like that. Joyous Orthodoxy, I think it's called. But it's kind of like, yeah, but it's Protestant. We really have, so we've got to kind of unwrap the fact that no, true Orthodoxy is something that is different in certain fundamental elements than what other churches have received for whatever reasons, and it's our role is just to share those things, just to fill things off for them that would be helpful. So that's, but I think in the end, this evangelization thing, I think as priests, this is the way I see my own life and my own ministries, really setting up kind of an infrastructure for prayer, an infrastructure for parish leadership, an infrastructure for some sort of community life, and all that. To real work is what happens when people are living with each other, working together, talking to friends, inviting them, to be part of something that is a blessing to them. And that's how I see, that one of the benefits that could be forthcoming from all of this, really, is just an openness to something new in terms of their spiritual life.
Right, and so that openness, uh, comes from that quiet, that humility. What is available here that I've never even thought of. I'm still trying to figure out what my role is at the University of Georgia. Right, I don't know. I mean, I'm a full-time student. Right, I'm a teaching assistant. But you know what? I'm a Christian, and I'm a priest.
Right.
Right. What does that look like? And so, rather than try to define it going in, which if I had a better clue of what the world was like and stuff, maybe I'd have been able to do that. I just kind of go in it and look for opportunities. And I had someone come up to me and say, hey, what do you think about maybe having a lunch Bible study? What?
Cool.
Huh. Yeah, and then I think about it, I'm like, you know what? At my, when I worked there in Virginia, we had a D&D group that met during lunch, right? So a gaming group, right? There are opportunities there to not D&D, but I'm just saying that lunch, people like to eat together. It's very natural to praise God, to have accountability, to share stories over meals, right? This is biblical.
Right.
Everybody needs to eat, and everybody needs to know the love of Christ, right? So, there you go. It's like those priests that you see who just show up at the coffee sign and put the sign out. The priest is in, right?
Right.
I'm available. I'm here for you, right? But it doesn't have to be a priest. If we wait for the priest to do that, what's the proportion of priest to laity?
Right.
The demand for the gospel is going to be met by us, and other things are going to step in. So how do we do that work of equipping the saints? What does that even look like? Because we haven't been doing it all that well, and now, so we wasted time when things were safe, things were good. We could have been doing this. We could have been preparing for it. And now we find ourselves in need of some skills that we have to develop as we're using them. So, what do we do?
Let's just pause there for a second, okay? And just say, okay, so let's just, maybe by the grace of God, this does turn around quickly. Now, I think Georgia, you guys are leading the way in terms of being one of the first states to reopen a bunch of stuff. And the whole idea of holding church services and that sort of thing, or regathering as communities, I think there's a whole issue of fear here, which is a whole other spiritual topic that's, at some point important to address. But it may be sooner rather than later that we actually do have a chance to start gathering together. But what you were saying about, this whole idea of we lost time, okay, or we lost the opportunity before. Well, by golly, when the doors open again, let's get after it, okay? And so maybe this time is, okay, so when that time comes, we want to be ready to go full bore, or we want to be ready to equip the saints. We want to have our ministry groups meet, or we want to really get back in, and do this at a higher level, at a better level. There's no reason, for example, why we can't now really search through and find good reading materials, sharing those reading materials in forums like this, whether it's person to person, or or even having sort of remote kinds of studies where you just simply ask a list of 3 or 4 questions based on a reading about. It's a great time with Acts of the Apostles and all that, we read in the church, saying, okay, so we let's confess that we didn't do as much as we could have. We weren't good stewards of our time and of our energy then. But by golly, now it's time. And so let's do it, and let's re-engage in this. And I think we may actually have people that, having not had the chance to go through might really, in missing that, realize is, oh yeah, this is really what such an important part of my life is about. I want to I want to share this. I want to not only deepen it myself, but I want to share it with others. And that, in and of itself, that attitude, in and of itself, uh, is the starting point for, okay, so here's how we do it, or let's explore how we do it, or these are the principles of, uh, how the church approaches these things. And I think a deep study of this by the people who are good at deep studies, that can translate it into, action items and things like that, will really, you know, that's the stuff of equipping the saints, I think, to say, these are things that we can do.
Yeah, and
So,
so tonight, and we're doing that. This is awesome. Like tonight at I think it's 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Look on Facebook. It's there. That's where I saw it. Alexei Krendach and I forget the other person. They're going to be giving a talk. I assume it's going to be data driven because that's his thing, right? What
right,
is the
right,
coronavirus doing to our parishes right now, right? So
right.
we're already doing that work, and also I see all the live streams and the effort to get content out there. That's what this is. This is me just saying, hey,
Right.
there's Netflix doesn't scratch every check every box. Let's get content out there. And so what you could have, it's like back in the day when there was a time when the only way to really enjoy good music was to go to an opera or go to the performance of an orchestra, right? And then it was made available in the home, and people developed a greater appreciation for music. It became more widespread, and it also increased the desire to see live shows, right? At least
Yeah.
that's how it can work, right? So this could be a chance to reinvigorate things like Bible study, book studies, and the weekday services, right? You see how it can be done well. You see how enjoyable it is when the superstars do it. But then there's also a recognition that face to face, local, like we have preachers in the church that are just amazing, right? The fact when people tune into that right now because they can't go to their own church, they're like, wow, I've never heard anyone preach like this, right? Well, then
Right.
when they come back, maybe they're listening a little bit more, and maybe the rest of us who are not superstars will learn from these others so that we can step up our game. One of the things that helped me so much with Bible study was watching Jordan Peterson, this guy who comes from the
Oh yeah.
outside, right? And he gets millions of people to watch his Bible study of the Old Testament. I'm like, whoa, he's what? People are right. I'm like, well, there's no gimmick to it. He's just saying what brings. For one, he's enthusiastic about it, and he's also showing there are deep truths here. That's kind of my job, right? If I had been doing that better, right? So the next time that I ran an Old Testament Bible series, I'm like, no, let's look at what's important. Let's not just look at dates and what happened and what the Father said, except as it points to things
Think
that
on
are
your
going to
text.
help people in their daily life, right? So I think that
Yeah.
that there can be an energy that comes out of this, right? At least that's my hope. That's my hope.
Yeah. I agree. Uh, I think one of the things to note, and it would be worth. Uh, there's just such a need to get this stuff out there to share this. But one thing I learned about yesterday was that the Talos project that comes out of Holy Cross, and the folks that are putting that together, they've gathered a group of young people who have offered to basically serve as kind of like a help desk for churches that want to do online this, that, or the other thing, which is like an amazing thing. How many of us, especially of us older guys, it's like, we don't want to be bothered because we've been through, the technical stuff, and it just drives us crazy, and we don't know it. And a 5-year-old could solve it, but we can't. Well, Now, here's a group of young people that are willing to come side by side and say, hey, this is all you need to do. Do this, 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 and this. I'll walk you through it, that sort of thing. To the degree that, that kind of thing can emerge. So here now is an opportunity that they're exercising a ministry to the church that's going to then enable somebody else to do another ministry. I mean, that's how it works best. The more that we can do that. And the electronic side of things is one thing, but I think that there are whole other dimensions of. For example, I was just really edified when I saw Archbishop Daniel took the seminarians down to the local food bank. It's like, okay, guys, they need bodies, and you guys are young. Have at it. So they're unpacking boxes and loading trucks, whatever the hell they're doing. But that kind of thing. That's the sort of thing that people will see and sense something beyond just a cerebral understanding of Christianity and get to another dimension of it in their own lives. And so the more that kind of thing can be carried out, I think it will make a statement for us all, to encourage us all in the faith. And then, you consider doing this content stuff too. It's important.
Right. Yeah. And we're just scratching the surface here. So think about, when we just open our eyes and say, okay, there are needy people in my community, my friends, I have friends that don't know the gospel, right? What is the best way, right? And the people that I interact with, they're intellectuals, right? And they have these biases against religion. Right? If I say, hey, I'd love to have you come to church sometime, they're like, yeah, right, yeah. Because they're so beyond that, right? But if I say, hey, look, we're fixing a turkey on Thursday. Why don't you come over to our house for dinner and bring a friend, right? And then they see what a house that is dedicated to God and to harmony and all this, what that looks like. They see us praying and how we interact. They see the home, with the icons, and it's just a pleasant space. It's busy space, but it's a pleasant place. There's no loneliness in it, right? So some of the things that they struggle with in their life, they see the solutions in how we manage our household, right?
Yeah.
And so just that act of bringing someone from the outside into a Christian home for dinner, right? Can be the beginning of many things. So I wonder if those of us who are able just open up our homes once a week, and that becomes a family thing. Who are we inviting for dinner this Thursday, right?
Right.
And you bring them in.
That's it. Right. That's a great idea. Right now, unfortunately, there is not a whole lot to do that. But again, it's the kind of thing that percolates, and so that when the time is right and the door is open, then let's do it. Let's find those kinds of things that are really true to who we are. I would not, how shall I say, discourage, though, that whole idea of inviting colleagues to come to church. A friend of ours who we know from the Harrisonburg area from way back, you would have known them. But this is how they came into the church, where the person went to a church. It was in a language they didn't understand a word of, and it just spoke to them. And however God cracks the shell or starts the process, but it could be even something as simple as the music that we have. I mean, I know how music stirs your soul, and my own as well, and just even putting the beautiful chants out there, that will speak in some way, and especially then when people start to see the depth of what is actually being prayed I
Right.
mean, there are all kinds of avenues like this really they're fallow fields. We really haven't thought about
Yeah.
this, you know, to
Yeah.
actually do it, to try to promote it or to try to make something happen out
And
of it.
here's the thing: once we start thinking that way, it opportunities present themselves. That's just the way it works. Once you become responsible for something, even at your work, okay, your new job is this, right? All of a sudden you start, that's how you frame your interaction with the world, is in terms of that thing, whether it's safety or whatever, right? That becomes the way that you evaluate what's going on. Once we start thinking as evangelists, then everything becomes an opportunity, right? And as Orthodox, there's so when I was, as a Protestant, you have your elevator speech, you have your witness, right? And I think it's important we develop that. I'm going to bring somebody on in a couple weeks, Lord willing, to talk about how to work on your witness, your testimony, and that's certainly part of it. But as Orthodox Christians, we have so many
Fortunately, I
things to
think
offer
our
people.
signal has betrayed us.
You're right. Can you hear me?
Okay, you're coming back.
Yeah, funny. So we lost the last. I think it stopped just a minute ago. It happens. It happens.
Yeah.
So we lost our YouTube connection too. So, oh well, that was good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I can still turn what we're doing right now into a podcast. So let's keep going a little bit further. So this idea that once you start thinking of as an evangelist, and specifically as an Orthodox evangelist, it's not just your testimony. It's not just it's never just, even for we do tend to stereotype evangelical Protestants. But if we develop our testimony and we know the resources that Orthodoxy has to offer. So you were saying the music. Is somebody a musician? Oh my goodness. Invite them to service. I bet you they haven't heard a cappella done well by a small group the way that we do it, right?
Sure.
If they're interested in culture, right? So, you know what? We've got somebody coming in to give a talk on, the high culture of Constantinople, right? Or something like that, right? There's always a way. There's so many things that we have available to us that we've been selective in using, and now we can be more intentional about it.
Well, and it goes back to the fact, again, I'm in a whole different place than everybody else, but the reality is that probably most priests are not nearly as worried about all the day-to-day stuff. That, all of the meetings, all of the, the youth group, this or that, preparing for this, and even preparations for the services in terms of all of those kinds of things. So guess what? It gives you time to actually think about this stuff, which ordinarily for us is a luxury probably. But now this may be exactly the time to think and to pray about what is it, and maybe as much as anything, not only the it, but the who. Going back to the idea of who has certain gifts that could really be brought to, to God's purposes in this new framework, whatever it's going to look like, and we don't have to predict what that's going to look like because we don't know, and that's going to be my tendency is always figure out and create a framework. But regardless of it, who are the people that will be the ones that will, make it across the Red Sea and journey for a while and head for the Promised Land.
So let me throw one idea, and then we'll finish, and this will be a kind of a hook for a future conversation. But one of the things that we're learning now and we're comfortable with now is conference technology, right? Up until recently, for most stuff, it was available, but it was so awkward. It was no good. But now, whatever technology is, whether it's Zoom or whatever, we can actually listen to people and get work done, not just check boxes. And what I've enjoyed is having small meetings with, for example, I have office hours for my seminary teaching, right? Mm-hmm. So people come in, I invite a priest or two to come in from outside, and we share Christ with each other. I compare that to the idea of the accountability group that was, I don't know if you know of anyone who was part of that or if you were part of that, but I knew people who were in this. They did kind of a pilot study that they got funding for, and they would have groups of maybe 5 to 7 priests with one person organizing it. It was an accountability group, right, that would meet regularly and try to take advantage of that small group dynamic. And it wasn't done online. It'd be very much in person. But taking that idea and using it, that's something that we can do now. I can gather together the equivalent of my parish board or my leadership of my parish, and we can just, talk about issues and how we can, bring Christ into it. And that way we deepen our relationship with one another, and we're better leaders, right? So there are things that we can be doing right now that I think we should be doing right now. And, for example, priests can feel very alone, and it's very frustrating, and they're suffering from temptations of despondency and things because they're not able to do the thing that they are called to do, to be with people when they're suffering, face to face, bringing the sacraments, right? So priests need priests even more right now. So how about if everyone was a member of a priest group that met once a week on a certain night, where you prayed together, you shared struggles, you shared joys, and you knew that you weren't alone, right? That's something we should probably, everyone should be plugged into a group like that. So, and there's nothing stopping us. This is not something that requires, a bishop to say, you need to be doing this. We know we need to be doing it. We know we need to do it regularly. So, hey, let's get on it, right? So, that's I think that's the next thing that there are a lot of things. And you were saying, you're kind of in a different space. Most of us are. Both of us are in the fringes of, the traditional priestly ministry, right? But that also gives us some freedom to think outside the box a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's needed now. I mean, because all the boxes are just smashed. I mean, in terms of, at least for the short term, all the things that we're used to doing with our time and the skills, that, we've got to just learn how to do some different things differently. I would say this too, and this is in part from not only a video series I've been watching on leadership, which is great, but also it was a result of a PBS special that I watched last night. It was on the guy who did research on, got a Nobel Prize for a cancer treatment using immunology and the T cells, and you don't have to go into all the science of it to appreciate what this guy did. His mother had died from cancer, so he had something deep inside of him, and he's not a Christian. In fact, there were certain things that pointed that out very clearly. But the thing that struck me was this man's motivation was so deep that he pursued this with such a relentlessness, all the while having, living his life in, certain very interesting ways. He sang in a Texas bar. He's from Texas, okay? So, I mean, that created its own interest just simply because a guy from rural Texas wound up going to, like, Berkeley, So, but, he had sang at a bar with Willie Nelson, and I mean, so it was an interesting thing, but he had that side of his life, but then he had this incredibly powerful vocation, is what it was, driven out of, his own experienced earlier in life, and he found the scientific reality. He gained the insight. Okay, he studied. He did all the groundwork. What he had to do, but really it was that out of the box thinking that really, in some ways, it was a reversal of what the common wisdom was. He said, no, it's exactly the opposite is what's going on. And he was proved to be right, and that's why his treatments worked, everybody else's did. And he eventually wound up getting a Nobel Prize, and at this point, many people who have been treated with cancer have recovered because of it. But the thing that struck me was this persistence, and particularly when he was trying to get this drug to get to testing and FDA approval and all that stuff. He was convinced of the science. He was absolutely right. But nobody would buy into it. He had to take it and run with it again and again, keep beating walls down. It took him 15, 20 years to take the idea, which was always potent, and to actually make something happen with it. Okay? And I think that's where we fall short a lot of times, because we have great ideas. And many of them could be very fruitful. But I don't think we persist and really believe in ourselves enough to carry it through. And I can tell you that I in my own life and ministry, I've fallen short in this way many times, to bring forward those things which are important and which are true, and to really have that persistence to do that, regardless of what people are saying, resistance and all that sort of things. So whatever it is that the Lord puts on our heart, I think we really need to go with it and to realize that, no, it's not going to be easy. And none of this is going to be easy to implement. And, if we think it is, then it's probably not from the Lord anyway. Because, feeding 5,000, a couple of loaves and 2 fish, it takes a whole level of commitment and energy and faith and prayer and all this stuff that, isn't par for the course. It's not the easy ones.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so stay the course. Yeah. Well, thanks, Father Robert. I really do appreciate your time today. It's always a blessing to talk with you and hear your heart.
Well, thank you, Father, and always encouragement to me too. Just knowing, in some ways we think very similarly, and in other ways we're coming from very different places. So it's always interesting to find the intersection, if not collision, between some of these ideas. So anyway,
Exactly. All right. Well, I appreciate it, and I'll see you online and everybody else. Until next time, Godspeed.